Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode we're gonna discuss about rising ocean sea level, and this is very important, especially for many developing countries. They have the same kind of problem. Even in the COVID-19 period, we are observing that many government taking this SDG Sustainable Development Goal in an effective way, but still we have lot of challenges and we have to solve this problem. And we have our expert Mr. Alex, Mr. Rob, as well as Prati. So I want to start with Prati because she is new in World Talent Economy Forum. So Prati, can you please introduce yourself and your background with our World Talent Economy Forum?
Sure. Thank you for having me today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I have done my BSc with geography, and then I did my master's with heritage management. Previously, I have done research on mangroves. There were two projects. One was mangroves as coastal bioshield to protect the coastlines, and second was coastal area management project. I was awarded for both. One was I was declared as brand ambassador of Gujarat Ecology Commission for their program combating environmental degradation, and second was Nanubhai Amin Memorial Award for scientific research. So that was part of my studies as well. And I am also founder of an environmental group called Baroda Strikers, which I run in my hometown, Vadodara. And I have studied mangroves coast and the coastal zones of Gujarat extensively.
Thank you. We have our activist, Mr. Alex. So, how do you want to introduce this problem with our like audience? And most important thing is that I believe that same kind of problem has, yeah, Indonesia also has, even example Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka, even some part of India also have same problem. They are affecting already. So, how do you want to analyze these issues?
Yes, thank you, Sharif, and thank you for another great discussion. It is 7 a.m. I'm just waking up here in Santa Cruz, California. I am relatively close to the ocean here, approximately 15, 20 miles away. So I do visit the ocean often, and I've tried to raise awareness in my community, and it's frustrating, again, because of the disinformation. A lot of people here in my community doubt the ocean's rising, and hopefully more people are waking up just, as educational platforms like this continue to reach more people. So yeah, I do live by the coast. We have been affected by rise in ocean sea level as portions of the coast are now eroding in different locations. So I might go into that, but I do want to talk about so this topic of conversation is the rising ocean sea level. So that's the global sea level. It's not just in one particular area, and that is happening globally because of the melting glacial ice caps, specifically the ice caps or the ice that's located on land. So that's one of the main reasons the ocean level is rising. The other reason is thermal expansion. Thermal expansion is actually just the ocean expanding when it warms. As water temperatures increase because of global warming, ocean temperatures increase. The ocean expands, so that actually causes the ocean levels to rise as well, and that's concerning because that's going to continue to happen exponentially. There are a lot of communities at risk around the world. I have a list of some of the top 10
Mr. Alex,
major
Mr. Alex,
areas
We've lost sound.
that
you
we
lost
have
sound.
on the Climate Central website. These are some of the areas
I don't think
We
you can
can
hear
hear
us either.
you.
18-foot
Alex,
sea level rise,
Alex,
6 meters, and that will
Alex,
displace millions of people. So this is very concerning because we will continue to see mass migrations of people in the next century, but we also have to start implementing mitigation strategies when it comes to hurricane-prone regions. There are a lot of techniques and measures we can put in place and how we could restructure some of our cities. Mangroves, planting mangroves are also important. So I guess I'll go into some of those once I
Mhm.
get the floor
Okay.
back.
Okay.
Pass
Thank
it
you.
on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. So how do you want to introduce this point, and how do you want to analyze? And beside that, I love to learn more. Example, do you have any solution specifically for this rising sea or ocean level, sea level, or this kind of things you want to share with our
Well, the first step is
audience?
that you have to take is first step you have to take is to and Sharif, you're breaking up a lot. The first step we really have to take is to get rid of the well, we call it fake news here, but the false news stories that really try to discredit the global warming trend information and the rising sea problem. If people and governments don't take it seriously, we won't have the mitigating measures in place in time to do really any good. The biggest impact, of course, are in the lower areas. Areas that are at near or below sea level are going to be the broadest hit. But if the petrochemical industry continues to spread false information about global warming and rising sea levels, then the efforts to mitigate the problem don't get funded. And if they don't get funded, then we don't have a solution in place before the problem actually hits. Right now, it looks like a lot of the low-lying areas are going to have to move inland or relocate. I think some of the projections I've seen indicate that that even if we were to move aggressively right now, we wouldn't be able to significantly reduce the increase in rising sea levels near term. So fixing the problem with regard to clean information, understanding the problem, and then getting governments to focus and fund mitigation and to offset global warming. Certainly this week we got word that even France isn't in compliance with the Paris Accords, and that's problematic. It just makes it look like a lot of the politicians are giving the effort lip service, and they're really not driving through to truly mitigate the global warming problem. So I think the biggest issue right now, at least from my perspective, is the amount of false information that's keeping the funding from going to the areas it must go to mitigate the problem.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Paul, how do you want to introduce this problem?
Well, I think more and more people are becoming aware that sea level and climate change are intricately connected. Of course, the rate of sea level rise is rapidly increasing, and there's a lot of different factors that affect the amount of sea level rise we realize on any particular coastline, right? Most people, think that the sea level rise is the same everywhere on the planet, and that would be a reasonable assumption, except that there's a lot of other factors in play, which I can, talk about some of the details of as we go on in this show. But the, mostly from a scientific point of view, it's the biggest factor causing sea level rise is thermal expansion of the ocean with rising global temperatures. But there's more and more contribution to sea level rise increase from melting glaciers, from the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. For example, the melt rates of both Greenland and Antarctica, I may have said Iceland, Greenland and Antarctica ice sheets. The melting rates are doubling about every 8 to 10 years or so. So, and they're having a much larger contribution now to sea level rise. The ocean currents have been shifting, so that affects sea level rise. So, if you look at the east coast of the US, for example, the rise is enormous because of the changes in the Gulf Stream behavior. So it's going to become a huge problem. But most people also think that what will happen, with sea level rise is, eventually their basements will be flooded if they're on coastlines, etc. But it's a lot worse than that, because when you have what the big factor is that will destroy lots of coastal houses is storms. Of course, with the higher sea level rise, with the high tides, with the water being pushed up from storm fronts onto the coast and the ocean currents shifting, it'll be it'll be a big storm that comes along that will destroy your house on the coast. It won't be water in your basements. The storm surges and things will just be on top of the sea level rise, so make the probability of damage or destruction of your coastal property occur. So so I'll listen in and hear what the other people have to say, but the rise of course is much faster than expected. The IPCC numbers are forever conservative on sea level rise, and we're getting what's called sunny day flooding in many coastal cities right now, at least in the U.S. and other places, like for example Miami, places in Maine. Streets are being flooded on sunny days with no storms from the sea level rise that we've already experienced.
Thank you, sir. From this chart, we are observing from 1880 actually it's increasing, and from 1980 it's actually increasing a lot. It's really a problem for the global arena. My question is that really, do we have any solution right now? I want to go for the open-ended question. Anyone who want to give the answer, they can. Actually, we have any real solutions that solve these things, Mr. Paul?
Yeah. No. There's no solutions really. I mean, if you've got climate change, if you've got ever warming temperatures, and the ocean is almost like a thermometer, right? In a way, it's a thermometer. So, and 90%, over 90% of the heat that the Earth is absorbing is being absorbed into the oceans, causing the heating. I mean, we're seeing heating all the way, of course, the surface water heating is the largest, but we're seeing heating penetrating all the way down to great depths of the ocean. So
Mr. Rob?
It's not something that can be, there's no solution.
Okay, Mr. Rob, yes.
Well, I mean, yeah. So when you say the solution to global warming, of course, and rise of sea levels is to certainly address the global warming problem. But in the interim, we've certainly had solutions, at least point solutions in the past. Dikes, land reclamation projects. Japan's been particularly aggressive at building places to live and places that are generally covered with water and more so. But nothing is inexpensive and nothing is easy or fast. But at the very least, we should be shoring up our seafront cities, putting in place mitigation efforts. The issue, of course, is when we have rising sea levels, almost any storm then can come in and do significant damage to those coastal communities. And so you have to fund efforts to mitigate those problems or relocate your population. Those are really kind of your choices. You either put in place mitigating technology, dikes, pumps, the kinds of things that we already do in areas that are at or below sea level. And you start anticipating the problem and recognizing that the weather itself is becoming a bit unstable. And so weather events that can create catastrophes become much more common. If it was me and I was directing people as where to build, I would not be suggesting they build anywhere near a coastal area right now, unless there were some type of significant, either man-made or natural barrier to rising waters and particularly storm surge. So you can mitigate it, just expensive. And at some particular point, I expect the world will finally do the calculation and figure out it's probably cheaper to address the core problems than it is to constantly try to whack down the symptoms of those problems. But the reality is we do have to do something. That this continuing to not acknowledge the problem and not even attempt to mitigate it in critical areas is going to be problematic for the civilizations and the citizens that live in those areas. And so we go back to my main premise is we have to get people focused on the problems and addressing them now, and not wait until we lose a few cities before we do it. But my expectation, it will be the latter, not the former, that occurs.
Thank you. Madam Prati.
Yeah, so adding to that, of course, we are already seeing the effects of global warming. We are observing it, and India is quite vulnerable. Talking about India, we have three major cities: Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai, which has huge number of residents living on the coast, and it is actually shrinking of the cities because the land is eroding and also the water level is coming up. So the density of the population, and then we have less resources, and then we also have to think of the displacement and relocation of that huge population, which is a major challenge as a management issue. Another thing is, of course, that uh, along the Indian coast, looking at the statistics, it has risen by 8.5 centimeter during the past 50 years, so which is quite high. And intense spells of precipitation and uneven, spread of rainfall is increasing. We are seeing more tropical storms more often than we had seen before 10 years, and it is increasing trend in mean sea level because in the low lying area especially it is affecting more, and then islands are affected more. So that, and then global warming is an issue. We are seeing it. So we have to start actually to look at that statistics and then try to slow it down. We are already in the runaway reaction. We have to first slow it down and then see how we can decrease the number, in rather stop the numbers getting increased. Yeah.
Thank you. Uh, Mr. Alex, I just want to, before you go for the discussion, because one of our speaker, Mr. Philip, he is unable to join. He sent message to our group, Facebook Messenger. Can you help him? As well as I already sent him StreamYard, but I don't know why he do not get it. But I want to add, beside that, Mr. Alex, can you please help your friend? Besides that, I just want to add one positive point, that 2020 Climate Change Performance Index, I want to introduce it. Countries with the highest achievement in the climate protections. We are observing Sweden in very good shape, Denmark, then Morocco. These are the top three countries. Beside that, UK, Lithuania, India, Finland, Chile, Norway, Luxembourg, Malta, and Latvia. They are also performing very well. And finally, we are observing, yes, Switzerland. So what do you want to say about this kind of statistics? We are observing most of the like European country, they are doing well. Beside that, India also doing well. Some of the African countries also doing good in that situations. But I love to know more about our biggest economy, USA, as well as China. Yes, Mr. Rob.
Oh, me.
Yes.
Well, as you probably know, we're not doing that well here. We just had 4 years of full-on climate denial. So the progress here in the United States is mixed at best. Fortunately, the big coastal areas that we have, New York and California, are pretty much all in on trying to fix the problem without central government help. It hasn't been great. The current administration has come in with an aggressive plan to get us off at least petrochemical products, and that actually has a dual beneficial impact. If we were able to get off petrochemical products, not only do we reduce the global warming cause here in the United States, but we reduce the funding into counter messaging about the problem, and effectively would, over time, hopefully reduce, if not eliminate, the false news stories that keep us from funding these efforts adequately, which of course remains the big problem. You certainly find countries that are known to be pretty aggressive, like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, with regard to their population as being pretty aggressive with regard to addressing climate change. And the fundamental reason, I think, for them is less about climate change and more about creating a healthy environment for their population, but the benefit is the same. But it might show a better motivating factor to drive funding to the effort by focusing on the other benefits of reducing pollution in the environment, and maybe using that as the lever in which you steer government into programs that are also beneficial for the climate.
Yes, Mr. Alex.
Yes. Okay. So I'm a little bit more awake now. Good morning, everyone. It's really early here. So I have some notes, some things that I want to cover. There's already been a lot of good points brought to this discussion. I do value that Paul mentioned how the oceans absorb 90% of the heat entering Earth, and so they're absorbing all the heat. We would see a lot more devastating effects in regards to climate change, or specifically global warming, if it wasn't for the ocean. It is absorbing a lot of heat. And like Paul mentioned, it's not just the surface ocean, it's the deep ocean. So in the past, we've had hurricanes that are being fueled by the surface ocean water, the heat on the upper layers of the water. But now that we're having deeper, the heat's now deeper into the ocean. That's why we're seeing more severe hurricanes, because it's not just the hurricane sucking up the heat at the top of the ocean, it's actually absorbing a lot more of the deep ocean heat. So this is an existential threat that's going to affect everyone on Earth. It is going to cause mass migrations of people around the world. It's going to cause damage to property, loss of life. It's already a serious issue that we're dealing with in different places around the world. I've now been through 7 hurricanes. I've covered the aftermath of 5 hurricanes. I've seen the devastating impact of superstorms, rising ocean sea level in association with storm surge. And that's especially worse, like Paul mentioned, when there's high tide, but also when it's when there's the moon tide, when it's even higher. And you put all those things together, then when there's a river mouth, it's just really accelerating the issues and amplifying the problems. So hurricanes and loss of life and damage, that's going to be something that we're going to see a lot more in the future, especially in hurricane-prone regions. Mangroves are one of the ways to mitigate that. New York is even more susceptible because of, like Paul mentioned, the different currents that are occurring, and New York's actually sinking as well, and I'm not going to go into that, but so the ocean level rise is going to be a lot more complicated and more severe in New York and a lot of the other metropolitan areas. Some of the worst areas affected around the world are going to be China, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Japan, specifically Tokyo, the US, specifically New York and New Orleans, Egypt, that's going to be Cairo, Brazil, and the Netherlands. Those are some of the top areas that will be affected. Those are large areas with a large populace. So when we talk about rising ocean sea level, I have not yet heard the rate. So from the research that I did, please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing that it's rising at an average of 3.3 meters per year. That's approximately 1/8 of an inch per year. And that's going to vary in different places because it's not going to be consistent. Some areas are going to be affected more than others. So I wanted to cover some of those. And my notes are, I keep getting feedback. I gotta figure this out. I gotta figure out how to turn off my mic because I can't use this one.
People that aren't talking need to mute.
I'll pass the discussion off to someone else. I'll figure out my headset. I can't hear anything.
Okay, thank you. We have our new friend, Mr. Philip. Can you please introduce yourself? Mr. Philip, can you hear me?
People that aren't talking need to mute.
I'll pass the notes.
Okay, Mr. Paul, can you please
Yeah.
continue?
Yeah. So what people need to realize is that the rate of sea level rise on any given coastline is
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Mr. Philip, can you hear me?
There's a whole bunch of different factors. For example,
Can you please continue?
yeah. So what people need to realize is that the rate of okay, there's something weird going on, but anyway.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. So river deltas, for example, they accumulate lots of sediments from the rivers and it fans out in the river delta. And of course, all that extra weight can actually push down the land nearby on the river delta. So for example, a place like New Orleans, the expression New Orleans is sinking is actually quite true. Not only is the water level rising on the coast from sea level rise, but the actual land is subsiding because of this huge additional weight of the sediment. So that makes it worse. Isostatic rebound is an issue in some places, especially in the global north. Regions that were covered by glaciers 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, the weight of those glaciers actually pushed down the land. So because of the density difference, if you compare the density of ice to the density of bedrock, the ratio is about 1 to 1/3, right? So basically, if you have a kilometer of ice sitting on land for a long period of time, it will cause the land to subside because of that weight about 1/3 of a kilometer. So on Greenland we have 3 kilometers of ice at the thickest point. So the land is being pushed down about 1 kilometer. And when the ice leaves, of course, that land will rise up. So this was a puzzle in the far north because for a while there, people were unsure of what the sea level rise actually was, because if you measured it off the coast of Greenland, it looked like it was actually receding at times. And that was because of the rise of the land, the isostatic rebound was greater than the actual sea level rise. So the net result was it looked like the sea level was reducing. Also, you have a gravity effect. So, if we're talking about the ice on Greenland, it exerts a strong gravitational pull on the surrounding water. And as the ice melts and there's less and less of that mass pulling the water towards it, then the water can recede on, that particular coastline. So we have tide gauges all around the world to do measurements to get an average, and we also can use satellite measurements satellites to determine the amount of mass and the sea level rise. As I said, most of the sea level rise thus far has been from thermal expansion of the water. When you heat up the water, the molecules move faster and the water takes up more space. There's thermal expansion. Mountain glaciers have been a very significant source of water. So any molecules melting on land contributes to raising sea level. Glaciers on Greenland have been a big effect, and also in Antarctica, and the rates of melting of ice on Antarctica and Greenland have been doubling roughly, every 8 years or so, at least for the last 2 or 3 decades. And that will accelerate, of course, with more warming. Because the Gulf Stream has been slowing, the water is pushing more onto the continental shelves off the east coast of the U.S. So up in areas of Maine and the sea level rise, instead of being what Alex said about 3.3 millimeters per year, it's been over 10 millimeters per year in some of those regions. So all of these factors combined cause this huge rise. And what are the numbers? How much will sea level rise by 2100? If you look at the the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change numbers over, over subsequent reports, then their number keeps sliding upwards, but it's still relatively conservative. Things like 60 centimeters or so, 70 centimeters by 2100. James Hansen many years ago said that he expected sea level to rise 5 meters by 2100. So the numbers keep going, up and up. I mean, I've done a number of videos on sea level rise. Google Paul Beckwith, YouTube, sea level rise. And if you just look at the present rate of increase of sea level rise and the acceleration of sea level rise that is occurring, you can do back of the envelope calculations and come up with numbers like 7 meters of sea level rise by 2070, for example. Hopefully those sort of things don't happen, but with unmitigated climate change, then, as climate change accelerates more and more, I mean, those are the numbers. If the rate of change of sea level rise continues, then those are the sort of numbers that you get. And of course, those will, destroy coastlines around the world if those sort of numbers are realized.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Rob. Can you unmute yourself here?
Unmute, yes. So I think the question came in that while we were talking about, is it necessary to study the environmental impacts of rising sea levels caused by global warming? This is one of the catastrophic issues that we have, where we have plenty of heads up that it's coming. I mean, we've known we were going to have problems with rising sea levels for several decades now. And so it's kind of fascinating to notice that with this massive pre-warning, we're still not really adequately mitigating the issue. And so to the person asking that question, it's critical that we study this with the idea we've got to mitigate the problems in order to prevent them. And what's kind of just weird for me is with all this pre-warning that we have with regard to the problem, the level of mitigation is certainly subpar, and so the effort really needs to be to get more people aware of this, and so we get the funding we need to mitigate the problem.
Mr. Alex, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. So there's going to be a lot of issues regarding this. We've covered some of them. And, of course, there's hurricanes and there's storm surge and all of that. But there's also other factors when it comes to the real estate market. I mean, I don't know why people would continue to invest in coastal communities, properties, and real estate at ocean level. And that's going to impact the economy severely. As people become more knowledgeable of this, and as people around the world continue to see loss of property and loss of life in coastal areas in association with rise in ocean sea level and hurricanes. So the real estate market's going to be severely impacted. And we're already seeing that here in some of the hurricane-prone regions in New Orleans and Florida in the United States. Insurance is also going to be affected. Right now, like there's documentaries on it, and it's frustrating every time I go to the New Orleans region in Florida, and these people, like, they lose their homes or their homes are destroyed, and then from a hurricane or flood damage, and then they get an insurance settlement, then they rebuild their home in the same place, and it happens again. Sometimes they're holding on to money. It's just it's just a bad system, and we're not doing things right. And it goes back to like our throwaway economy, just that we continue to have our homes destroyed and rebuild them in hurricane-prone regions and susceptible areas. And right now, there should be no new homes built at low elevation areas, no new construction projects. We're just, this threat's happening, and it's going to be really difficult for us to move these major communities, and of course, impossible to move these major cities around the world. So there's, of course, there's floodgates and there's pumps. that we can do to mitigate some of these dangers, but it's going to severely impact the underground infrastructures. I remember when I went to New Orleans during Hurricane Sandy, and that's when all the tunnels were flooded from all the train tunnels, and it severely impacted the community, and it caused positive feedback loops when it comes to climate change. So we know this is happening, and it's difficult for us to find solutions because, like, getting to the root of the problem is basically solving global warming. But even if we did, with the heat that's already in the atmosphere, with the fossil fuels and the greenhouse gases we've already dumped into the atmosphere, it's already too late for a lot of the damage that we are going to see. We're already basically locked in to X number of feet over the next century, and that's going to be really difficult. So we do need to redirect a lot of our attention and our funds towards mitigation strategies. And again, I'm concerned for the people that don't have the ability to relocate, people in developing countries around the world that are very susceptible, and they don't have the money and the funds to relocate their entire communities. And even if they did, that's going to cause more civil unrest crossing borders. And I mean, it was even like, what, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the United Nations was focused on relocating people in remote islands. And I mean, right now they're like working on evacuating the Florida Keys so those people can move further into Florida, because it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. Another thing that we haven't discussed in this conversation, which is also going to be extremely problematic, is we have I think it's 460 nuclear reactors around the world, and last night I read that 1/4 of those are located at ocean level, and we've already one of the most severe consequences we've seen is the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power meltdown that was in association with the ocean. And as we continue to see more superstorms, we're going to continue to see more issues similar to that. There's this nuclear power plant or nuclear reactors located at the southern tip of Florida. And it was like 2 years ago, I was watching this hurricane. It just missed it, just a major hurricane. So, I mean, all it's going to take is one major hurricane to hit a nuclear power plant, or in the long run, yeah, the rise in ocean sea level affecting these. And it takes like, decades to relocate decommission nuclear power plants. So we're not doing things right. And again, we have a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. And then this is happening, and we need to direct our attention towards it. That's all.
Okay. Mr. Rob, I have specific things because our audience come from different background, different points, and they have sometimes developing nation. They say that the first world, they are the major key players who is damaging this climate and climate change issues, and they have to take a lot of responsibilities. So what are your observations? How we can solve these things? I want to say that how we can solve these things together, not only just it's all the responsibility of the developed nations, how we can work together on that particular point, especially climate change point.
Well, in theory, the UN probably should be taking, and certainly is trying to take, the central role in fighting climate change. The difficulty has always been that the UN lacks both the authority and the capability to deal with problems of this kind of scale. And so that's what I mentioned. The first step is really to recognize how serious this problem is and get it properly resourced. But part of that proper resourcing has to be a central organization that has the funding, the power to drive the change, and the capability to execute. And sadly, the UN just isn't where we need it to be to do this. But that's probably the start. If you want to do something collaboratively, you have to put in place an organization that can not only set rules, but can enforce those rules and make sure everybody complies. A lot of the developing nations are becoming dumping grounds for the waste that the developed nations have. And clearly that is not only unfair, it is damaging to the world. We all live on this planet together. And so trying to deal with this in part, I mean, even if the United States wanted to, now it does, but of course last year it didn't. It can't do it alone, and the other major, not only do the other major geographies have to participate, but the smaller geographies, the smaller countries have to do it as well. But it's certainly clear that the smallest countries and the emerging countries don't have the wherewithal to fight this. I was watching some of the problems that are going on in some of the tropical areas where they're just being buried in garbage at the moment, and that's a very visible problem. And if we can't fix that very obvious problem, which just has to do with changing how we consume, then global warming, which has a much bigger footprint and does require us to move from methods like petrochemical consumption that cause the problem to other greener areas methods become problematic. And even if we talk about moving to an electrical environment, unless we get rid of the petrochemical generating plants, we're not solving the problem. We're just shifting it to another part of the ecosystem. So it does require some type of a centralized effort with the authority to execute. And sadly, we just don't have that at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Paul, I have a question specifically. Many people, they do not agree with this climate change, and they said it's a part of natural cycle. So what the scientific analysis, because we already know that you have a lot of YouTube video on that particular issue. So how do you want to share your views on this point?
Yeah, there's a couple of key points that people need to always consider when they're assessing information, and that is the scale. The physical scale. We're talking about local issues, or are we talking about global scale, and also the time scale. We're talking about long term, short term. Paleo records, like really long term. So just to give you, I mean, as far as the present rate of climate change, it's far exceeding anything in the paleo records, in the past records, by an order or two of magnitude, like 30, 40 times faster. We're talking about, the rates of change of ocean rise, the rates of change of temperature, etc. So, natural cycles have occurred because of something called the Milankovitch cycles, where the Earth orbit around the sun changes because of different factors. So that those include the ellipticity of the Earth's orbit, right? So is the Earth orbiting the sun in more of a circular fashion or in a very elongated football? And why we have the seasons, and that tilt changes. We're talking, so these cycles are tens of thousands of years. Also, the Earth is orbiting like a top, and the axis of rotation is wobbling. Okay, so we have these three factors, these so-called Milankovitch cycles, that cause, ice ages and warm periods and so on, in the records. But these are over tens of thousands of years. These are over long periods of time. We're seeing on a year-to-year, decade-to-decade basis, accelerating warming, and the rates are far exceed anything that is so-called natural. In terms of, one thing Rob keeps saying is the petrochemical plants. And I don't know, I think when I hear petrochemical plants, I think of the plants that produce chemicals from fossil fuels, distillation towers, etc., plastics and rubber, like basically processing fossil fuels. But, I call it's fossil fuels combustion that is the biggest factor, right, for climate change. So fossil fuel or emissions from burning fossil fuels. So I thought I'd just, ask him, maybe you could answer when you're talking again, why are you calling it petrochemical plants? That's a bit confusing, I think, to most people. In terms of, are there any solutions to ocean sea level rise, rapid sea level rise? I said no. I said not really. I'm talking about global sea level rise. The only thing really is to address climate change. If we halt the global warming, the rapid rise of temperatures, and lock them to some level and then lower them, then of course that will that will affect global sea level rise. It will slow down and stop and reverse, hopefully. But there's a lot of things that are set in motion, so I would expect there to be quite a lag. I would expect, for example, if we addressed fossil fuel emissions, slashed fossil fuel emissions, and figured out ways to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and methane, so carbon dioxide removal techniques. And also, I think in order to do this, we're going to have to do some solar radiation management to buy us time, especially to try to preserve snow and ice in the Arctic, because so you have to look at these factors, and also nobody experiences global average temperature, so there's a huge spatial what you experience depends on where you are on the planet. Okay, I mean as you go to the poles, the warming is greatly accelerated. And as you go up in elevation, the warming is greatly accelerated. And if you're on land versus near the oceans or coastline, if you're in a coastal, in a continental climate, so you're not near any water sources, then the rates of warming are greatly accelerated. So there's all of these factors. So in terms of, most people talk about mitigation of sea level rise in terms of local effects. They're not talking about global mitigation. They're talking about how can you protect your particular region or your particular city. So sure, building seawalls and higher, barriers to stop the to protect your particular city. That is possible in some locations. It's certainly out of the question in Florida, for example, because the Florida, there's the bedrock is basically limestone, and over many years the water has etched holes and caverns and caves, etc. So there's no way that you can build a wall in Florida to keep the sea level back. Okay, it's just not going to happen. The sea level, the water will rise and go underneath any barrier you make through the perforations in the land, and you're out of luck. I mean, Florida, with meters of sea level rise, forget Florida. I mean, it's just it's going to be a disaster. And if you're on a coastline where near a river delta, for example, the land subsidence is large, and the more you build on that particular region, the more the land will subside. And build your barriers. And the question is, if you're building barriers, how long are the barriers going to be? Like, do you build a barrier to protect you for anticipated sea level rise of 0.5 meter, 1 meter, and then if we get 4, 5, 6, 7 meters, etc., this century, then you're out of luck. I mean, you've just wasted all of that money, which would be better spent to mitigating climate change itself. So we have to address the root cause, which is the rising temperature. And if we don't do that, then the sea level will rise. It's just a fundamental fact of expansion of water and melting of sea and ice. So again, the idea of mitigating sea level rise, like that whole term is a bit of an oxymoron to me. Okay. We can do it. We need to specify, okay, locally for a given city, we're going to try to protect this city, but that's not mitigating sea level rise globally. I mean, it's far from it, right? So we need to be clear about what we're talking about. We should always talk about, include the scale. Okay, so we're going to try local mitigation in this particular city using this particular technique, because otherwise, it's very confusing. So I just wanted to clarify what I meant by, we can't mitigate. And also, is it really mitigating sea level rise to take Mumbai, for example, and move the entire city inland? Is that mitigating sea level rise? No, that's retreating from the coast. Let's call things, let's call an apple an apple. Like, enough of these phrases about, and think of the cost. I mean, I bring the example to people of, look at the ramifications of 9/11. Okay, we lost two tall buildings and a third one collapsed. Okay, and look at the ramifications on the U.S., the complete change of their policy, the financial effects,
Right.
built up over many, many years, the recovery, etc. Let's look at those effects. And then now we're talking about flooding an entire coastline and losing hundreds or thousands of high rises in a city on a coastline. I mean, how? Let me ask you how you think the world economy can withstand that if that happens in a place like New York, for example. Sea level rises a few meters and New York's completely inundated. Thousands of buildings, large buildings are evacuated and left abandoned. I mean, how is that going to affect the global economy, given that 3 buildings down in 9/11 had enormous ramifications? So, we have to put some numbers to these, to the scale of what we're talking about here. There are some cities that are planning on moving. I think, is it in the Philippines or Indonesia or something? They're planning on moving some major cities away from the coastline. Yeah, so we really need to always consider the scale, local or global, and the time scale as well. So not just the spatial scale, but the time scale as well on how long things happen. And yeah, otherwise we're really not talking meaningfully about these things.
Okay, thank you. Madam Prati, what do you want to add for specifically what Mr. Paul actually said about this sea level rising? And there are actually many questions about this thing. So how do you want to analyze your point in terms of Indian cultures? And we love to learn more about the India.
Yeah, so it was very nicely put, and I think he has covered most of the points. But adding to that, one aspect which I would personally like to look at is glaciers are melting right now, and so is our freshwater resource. So, what is the rate of decreasing freshwater resources in a world? That I would really like to know if anyone has the idea. And another thing is also the coastal ecosystem. So, how this all is affecting the coastal ecosystem and biodiversity.
Yeah,
I'm keeping the questions open. Yeah.
Okay, I can talk a little bit about some of those things. So, another aspect of sea level rise that is huge actually is you start getting salt water onto soils. A lot of coastal regions, coastal flatlands, are very fertile farmlands, very productive and high yields per acre farmlands, and great soils. But they're low-lying areas along the coast. So without too much sea level rise, you start getting saltwater intrusion into the groundwater. When you have large tropical storms or hurricanes and a huge storm surge, that water goes further and further inland, and that salt water damages the soils and has a huge hit on farm production in those low-level areas. So, again, food supply is a huge issue that the world will hit a wall against very, very soon. Another factor, as you were mentioning, is the glaciers on. So we're talking about mostly mountain glaciers when we just say glaciers. If we're talking about glaciers other than those on Greenland and Antarctica, we're talking about mostly alpine glaciers, and those are causing a number of different factors of melting. First of all, those are the source of that ice and snow in high elevation regions. It's almost like a storage of water. It's stored in the form of ice, and then in the summers it's melting and it's feeding the major rivers. So if you talk about the Himalayan glaciers, that are feeding the major rivers, which feed literally billions of people, and those rivers the flow rates of those rivers are greatly decreasing as we're getting less snowpack building up into the ice in regions. So this is an enormous effect. So not only is that melting of these glaciers causing a big contributor to sea level rise, but it's also a huge factor for freshwater availability in many, many places. I mean, we're seeing the same sort of thing in Canada with the glaciers in the Rocky Mountains and so on. And the rivers, less flow rate in the rivers through Saskatchewan, Alberta, through farm grain producing regions. So all of these factors are starting to impact huge numbers of people around the planet. So we have to address the root of the problem, which is we need to slash fossil fuel emissions. We need to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, and I think we need to use solar radiation management to give us time to do this, to slow down the warming, give us time to do these things. Otherwise, we're just chasing one problem after another problem after another problem. And when there's too many problems, then we see governments collapse. So look at the water. Syria collapsed, the civil war, that was a water issue. There was a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 year drought from 2006 to 2010, and there was no water to grow crops. There was no jobs for the farmers. They went into the cities, and there were not enough jobs there, and the whole country just collapsed in civil war. So we're starting to see, huge consequences, and it's only going to cascade and multiply unless we, really, address the root cause of all of this, which is, we've got to stop these out of control temperature rises. And if the longer we leave it, the harder it becomes to do. It doesn't mean we don't continue to try, but we're just we're a completely illogical species on a global scale, for sure.
Mr. Alex.
Yes, I would like to add that the United Nations has been doing a lot of great work in this field, raising awareness, mitigation strategies, helping people relocate. So I want to commend them for all the work they're doing. I did want to mention New Orleans is built under ocean level, which is horrible because they are also in a hurricane-prone region. They have built a lot of flood walls and floodgates, but again, those are very, very expensive. Like Paul mentioned, it's not getting to the root of the problem. And I wrote about this in my book that I released like 3 or 4 years ago, the book. And I said basically what Paul's saying. It's like, rather than trying to protect this community and this country and this major metropolitan area, what if we took all of that global money that we're going to have to spend on this and just direct it towards the main root of the problem, just the main problem, which is global warming. I mean, it's because we're not going to be able to solve it. All these mitigation strategies are just putting band-aids on the problem, and it's not actually solving it. I've made social media jokes in the past where it's like, if you knew how serious this problem is, you would be freaking out right now. Like, you'd be going in your house and getting all your cups and empty water bottles and containers and filling them up, or filling up your kiddie pool, and making, like, we need to, like, there's so much water getting dumped into the ocean, and it is rising, and it's going to cause such an immense volume of damage. And again, suffering, loss of life, and just environmental damage. It's going to start taking away not just farmland, but trees and organic matter and everything that's actually helping us solve climate change. And then it's going to be absorbing more of the heat, and that's going to cause an additional positive feedback loop. So yeah, we're in a really really bad point with that. So I want to go over some basic notes that I have. People are always talking about or asking and questioning, well, why is the ocean level going to rise, higher in this location and that location? Isn't it supposed to rise evenly? And Paul mentioned some of the main points, which were great. So there's a couple others that we haven't yet discussed. So there is the current, because the ocean currents cause the water to bulge up in some areas. That's going to cause an increase in the water height in that specific area. For instance, New York, it's predicted that it's calculated that it's raising or increasing at a rate of 1.5 times the average height around the world. So there's also, as we are familiar with the hydrological cycle, how much it rains in a specific area, how much water is being dumped out at that river mouth, or what dams we've put in place, what reservoirs will affect that regional area. Paul did mention, what was that term when there's a big glacier over the continent?
Yeah. Isostatic rebound.
Okay, so isostatic rebound is happening in New York and other places in the the northern portion of the world. Probably it's happening. Well, I'm guessing it's happening like around Russia and everything, but specifically a major metropolitan area like New York. So since the ice is melting over the whole Canada area, it's causing it to lift up in like the center, correct? In the center of like the United States, the Canada area. So then where New York's located way off to the side, it's then lowering to a lower level.
Yes, that's correct.
That's from the weight of the ice.
That was covered by ice lifts up, and that takes many thousands of years to come to equilibrium. And then the areas around the edges can actually sink down because the mass is moving inward into the part that's rising up. So yes, that's correct. And I mean the UN. I just want to point out, like the UN, the climate reports from the UN, they don't suggest what countries should do. I mean they basically address the problem. But they don't really take a strong stand on saying what the solutions should be. I mean, they look at all of the different things, but so I think in terms of the UN, they do a lot through other agencies. Of course, they have many different sort of subgroups and so on, but it would be nice that on top of the big reports that they're put out on climate, they actually have some just on what must be done in their view to give us a future, basically.
Good point, Paul. That's probably because every situation is different in different countries around the world. That stupid term, not one shoe fits all. So they can't be broad and say, you got to do this or that, because every situation is a lot different. I did mention that isostatic rebound, hydrological dams, reservoirs, all of that. There's also the mass and the gravitational pull of specific continents and how they pull the volume of the water higher in some areas. And then there's also soil degradation, soil compaction, and the effect of microbial oxidation. And that's just basically where organic matter in certain regions is dying, so then the soil level in that region is actually getting lower. So a lot of reasons why the ocean level is going to be rising in some areas faster than others. And so I wanted to cover that. So as we continue, and a lot of these programs talk about misinformation, disinformation, there's videos online showing people that the ocean's actually lowering, and there's certain areas, and it's like they just went out and got videos at like low tide. I mean, it's not like the global average level is definitely rising. And as we were just discussing, these people that spread this information, and this hasn't been talked about in this program. So there's all of these people that have these opinions, and they share these videos, they spread this misinformation. And one of the ways that I try to explain it, or to them to convince them, or other people. So these people that are doing it, there's so many people in the world, and a lot of the misinformation that I've heard that's being spread are the people that I know that work in the food industry, or they're mechanics, or they're plumbers, or they're janitors, or they pay attention to, art or sports, or they're doctors. And they're not actually like Paul above me. He's a climatologist or a scientist. He spent a large portion of his life studying this. So again, the misinformation has really set us back and had severe systemic consequences throughout our society with addressing the issue. And now, I mean, when it comes to solving rise in ocean sea level, I do think that now with the situation we're in, we need to address, like, let's just say 90% of the funds and attention and resources towards the root of the problem. But now that it's so severe, I do think we need to direct a percentage of the money, attention, resources, and educational material towards mitigation strategies, just to slow the environmental damage that the rise in ocean sea level is going to cause, to hopefully prevent loss of life and all of that. So as we talk about hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, any form of cyclonic activity, there's usually a low pressure in the middle of the cyclonic activity, and then high pressure on the sides. So this causes a bulge in the ocean when the hurricane's approaching land, or the cyclones. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but if the ocean levels are rising by 3.2 meters per year, every meter makes a difference. So in 5 or 10 years, when all of those, when it accumulates, and then you have the hurricane going inland, that 10 meters or that 12 meters is going to cause a huge volume of damage. It's going to amplify millimeters. It's just gonna add to the hurricane, the height of the ocean, and the damage that's already been caused, because water is just very, very destructive. It's hard to deal with, and it's going to cause a lot more problems.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our new friend, Mr. Philip. Can you please introduce yourself with I think this is the first time you join with our forum.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
very sorry for the technical problem. StreamYard was not working on my browser. I had to switch to Chrome, and I really appreciate Sharif, sending it to me again. So I am the director of the Fiji Institute of Sustainable Habitats. We are on a tiny island outside of the main islands of Fiji. I have been, like Alex, I have been doing hurricane and disaster relief. I've been in 10 hurricanes, and literally on the front lines, both in preparation and in helping people through it, and then supplying for weeks or months afterwards materials so people could carry on. We are literally on the front lines ourselves. As our compound, we have a 68-acre place in Fiji in the Blue Lagoon, and we are basically our farm and community is at sea level. I have seen and been in firsthand extreme flooding, and seen our beaches destroyed and moved down the coast. And we know locally, the people who've lived there forever, that the greatest amount of damage is because of, at least locally in Fiji, is because of the removal of the natural ability to protect the shore, which is mangroves. So a lot of resorts nearby or other properties have cut their mangroves down to create a nice beach and moved a lot of sand, and it just washes away. And the lack of protection has increased the amount of destructive hydrologic activity on our coastline, and literally has washed our beach away. The trees are falling from the coast that did protect us. They're now falling into the sea. And it's, as Alex was saying, I agree. It seems almost too late at this point. We are already in a feedback loop where the continued global warming and how it affects the reflectivity of at the poles and the melting of the ice caps. It seems like, and what I've been working at is to convince people in Fiji, working with the emergency management district and all, that we have to encourage people now to only have very simple shelters anywhere near the coast where they do their fishing and farming, and move up elevation. as far as large cities go, that's a different story. But half of the world is still rural, and many of those people do live on the coastline and are fishermen and are living a subsistence life. And those are the people I'm most concerned with, as they are the ones getting the least amount of help or concern about dealing with this in many ways. And so we've been educating people to not only move to higher ground and not to continue to build anywhere near a coastline under, let's say, 10 meters above sea level, but also that we have to come up with strategies that address the problem directly by not adding to it. So a lot of construction in Fiji is done by importing concrete, blocks, steel, and other materials directly from Australia. And people are continuing to build in this way. And we've developed building systems using all natural materials that are all local. We built a structure in Fiji using only materials that are natural, found within 100 meters of the building site. And this includes clay and pumice, sand, and seawater, actually, not even fresh water for building. And because we built round buildings with domes, the architecture of the buildings alone is what's protecting them from being destroyed. In Fiji, in my 15 years of doing humanitarian relief and hurricane repair there, we found that the shape of the buildings alone is what makes a difference. Most injuries in hurricanes are coming from roofs, metal roofs flying off, and people being injured by debris and roofs slicing and killing them. I know this directly because I've worked with hospitals there, and the chief medical officers tell me where the injuries are coming from. With round structures, we find if we build them up higher and in a somewhat sheltered location, just the shape of the building alone, that it is a dome with no overhanging eaves, reduces the chance of destruction of those buildings immeasurably. In fact, the small building we built, which is not even connected to the ground by a foundation, has made it through 6 hurricanes in the last 4 years since we built the structure. The structure has not moved. It has not been damaged. So I actually brought this photographs and a discussion of this structure and what we've been doing directly to the Prime Minister of Fiji. And at that time, the acting Prime Minister was also the Minister of Women, Children, and Poverty Alleviation. And we have created an educational program where we train women, because obviously education of women is the best way to improve a society. We all know that. And so we've been educating women to be builders themselves so that when their homes are damaged or blown away, when they rebuild, they're not just putting sticks back together in a rectangle and sticking an overhanging roof that's going to be torn off and kill their neighbors. So the Fijian government has really loved this. I've worked with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Native Affairs, and Women, Children, and Poverty Alleviation. And the only thing stalling our program currently is COVID, because Fiji has no COVID cases currently, does not want any, and decided to shut all of the sea and airports to keep it from coming in. So our ability to continue this work is dependent, of course, on this ability to carry on with our educational program there. However, I feel that in a larger way, we want to make these technologies available to people, especially in developing countries around the world, who are on the front lines of climate change, who have their homes and their compounds, farms right at the sea, to let them know you're going to lose everything here. That's just a fact in the next 20 years. So what we can do is all together in a local sense, and we're doing this in Fiji, is decide as a group to begin building our structures further up. And as the structures below by sea level are damaged or destroyed or no longer habitable because the water is flooding the area, they've already made the transition to living up there and just using these bottomlands as farmland. We've also tried to get Fiji, which is heavily dependent on tapioca or cassava, which is all over Africa as well, to stop growing that rootstock as their primary food source because it is destroyed in freshwater flooding. We found sweet potatoes and yams will survive freshwater flooding that comes from the storms themselves. There's a lot of plants and trees that we are growing right along, including what we call a Fijian chestnut tree, which has names other around the world and is here in Mexico as well. And those are trees that can live at the shore and will not be destroyed by saltwater intrusion. So we have a lot of local things we're doing to show other Fijians and other islanders throughout the Pacific Islands. We plan on going to Tonga, Samoa, Kiribati, and other island nations who are literally on the front lines to show them we don't need to just sit here and take it as small communities that have a very strong network of coexistence, helping each other, that we can work together to build these hurricane-resistant structures on higher land and realize, yes, these traditional places where our families are buried, where we've always grown our food and fish, will be changing. And this is the time to move now. And of course, getting this out to people is the challenge, is letting them know, okay, we can't rely on multinational organizations or national governments to be able to address this problem when they're mostly focused on what's going on in the cities. I agree with Paul and Alex very much that, you know, this sea level is going to continue. There is very little we can do about it, as I'm a hydrologist as well, and for the water expansion carrying on. So we have to adjust ourselves. The planet is going to do what it does in response to endless global warming. Since we're not getting the Paris Accords to take full effect in a transnational way, we have to act locally. We have to encourage the people who are most in danger to adjust their lives and say, okay, money is just not that bloody important. We are going to leave our Florida beachfront properties. We're going to leave the below sea level villages or parts of New Orleans that can't support us living there anymore. It's just a fact now. And I know that because I have been monitoring this on the ground for the last 15 years and seen our beaches wash away, see the water literally be, it's about a meter higher, it seems, already where we live on the Blue Lagoon. And that may have something to do with being in a lagoon. However, I think that we have to get this knowledge out to people now that there is really almost no stopping it, because there's a lot of people who are working on the carbon capture and other side, but I don't see a lot of people working on giving alternative strategies to people who are already and permanently living on the beach to let them realize, and like in Fiji, most of the population, over 90%, lives within, you know, several kilometers of the sea. And so we have to move up higher and move inland. And I think that's one of the most important strategies for dealing with this, as well as some forms of sustainable living that will not come apart in a hurricane. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining today's session. So tomorrow we have another session. If you have time and our speaker has time, they can join. We will discuss about recycling and this kind of process. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start with Mr. Rob, then Professor Paul, then Mr. Alex, then Prati, and finally Mr. Philip. Mr. Rob.
Well, thank you. I wanted to leave folks with at least the thought that a lot of good things are in fact happening. With regard to solar energy, we're advancing technology relatively quickly. The issue with solar really appears to be storage. We're lacking advancements in storage, but thanks to electric cars, that's changed recently, and we're now showing a tremendous amount of advancement in areas like new battery technology and ways to store energy and carry it forward. One interesting project is actually using a combination of solar and hydroelectric power, where you use the solar to pump the water back up above the dam, and then use the dam's generating power to cover power needs at night. It's some fascinating stuff. Wind power is expanding to offshore resources, which allows us to take these things and put them in areas where there aren't people. A big problem, of course, with windmills is they do make noise, and a lot of folks don't want them in their backyards, but you can set them offshore and solve the problem. And recently they've come up with some braking technology that senses birds and will slow or stop the windmills if birds are seen nearby. Interesting to note, a lot of the birds that killed are actually predatory birds, which is just kind of a fascinating stat. The nuclear power remains one of the safest and best ways to generate electricity in a green fashion. But there is an effort to change the impression of nuclear power so that we can expand it and use it more broadly. It's kind of underneath a cloud of some of the failures that have happened in the first couple decades of nuclear power, but safety has been improved dramatically since then, and it is a viable technology. And of course, we've got multiple industries now committed to carbon capture projects. Some of the most interesting stuff going on is pretty fascinating, and that gets the carbon out of the air to address the problem. The auto industry, as we've known, is moving to an EV infrastructure project effort. The issue, and I mentioned it before, there was a question with regard to petrochemical plants. I was referring to petrochemical electrical generating plant, which is a problem when you're moving to electrics. A lot of the electrical generating plants still remain relatively unclean, and particularly the peak plants in the United States. As we move from, as we hit peak areas, the plants that come online are oil fired often. Of course, that doesn't do us any good. And one of the more interesting things that happened recently is using space-based solar power. That's now on the upswing again. And of course, with space-based generation, you don't have to worry about night, because in space it's never night. So we can figure out a better way to deliver the energy to the planet safer. They were talking about microwaves before, which have some rather painful side effects. Then we can solve that problem. So it's not to say that the world isn't working on ways to eliminate the causes of global warming. Science is coming forward. We just need more focus.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rob. Professor Paul.
Yeah, a couple of points that I meant to mention. As far as the the melting snow and ice on glaciers, right? A lot of the ice actually acts as glue and holds the rocks together. And as the ice is melting in glacier regions, then we're getting a lot more landslides and rock falls. And we just saw a catastrophic event a few days ago in India with a glacier collapse. There's lots, obviously there's loads of things to think about and to talk about with these topics. And I think it's important to have and implement a lot of these different ways. I mean, we all have to do our bit to try to slow down abrupt climate change and adapt and mitigate, and hopefully get governments to act and reverse the problem. I mean, it's sort of a long haul problem. I think the virus has affected many parts of the world. It's great that it hasn't made it to some places like Fiji, and other places like some of the islands are doing much better, like New Zealand, for example. Life's almost normal in New Zealand right now. And, people in North America are saying, wow, could we have done something like that, whereas we all suffer under lockdowns and so on. And, people are concerned about the effectiveness of vaccines on new strains, et cetera. So, this is like, hopefully we could get the message out that the we're not that resilient a society, and we need to do far better to build resilience. To address climate change. I think this is what we're going to see. We're going to have many years in the future of utter chaos from climate change, and if we there's huge ties. A new report has just come out about how climate change is really a key driver for increasing the number of bat populations in China, for example, and greatly increasing the risks of new viruses. And it's the destruction of habitat and the loss of biodiversity and going to sort of monocultures and so on. These are all greatly increasing risks of future viruses coming along. So it's all tied together. We're in a large system, and there's many components and much complexity. And I think it's pretty clear that the more complex a society is, the more risks there are, and the less resilience there is. We're much more fragile, when we rely so much on our technologies. So we need to sort of take a step back and figure out ways to make ourselves much more resilient as climate change proceeds. And it's sea level rise is always lurking in the background when we talk about climate change. It's sort of part and parcel of we talk about it's I say it's almost like a thermometer for the planet, the ocean, or it's like a proxy for the amount of warming there is the amount of sea level rise there is. But there's things, the extreme weather events that have greatly accelerated, are much more sort of urgent and in our face, and those are threatening our global food supply. So, I often tell people, they say, how much should I worry about sea level rise? Well, if you're not on a coastline, right, then it's not sort of a factor immediately for you. It's more, but extreme weather events are affecting everybody on the planet in a much more urgent fashion. And if they, reduce yields and we go to global food shortages, then those problems will be much more urgently in our faces than sea level rise is. So, thank you. Thanks to all the panelists for being here, and thank you, Sharif, for running these sessions once again. And please check out my website, paulbeckwith.net, and I have literally hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos on all aspects of climate system change, and also on different solution technologies and things like that. Whatever I learn, I can put it in videos. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Alex.
Yes, thank you, and thanks to another great discussion. Wonderful panelists. Thank you, Philip, for being able to sign in. So one of the things that since this is an educational platform, I want to mention La Nina and El Nino and their impact on the rise in ocean sea level and regional changes. Just if you're watching this video and you're using this as educational material, just keep in mind those two keywords and in association with regional influxes in rise in ocean sea levels and all that. I do want to encourage everyone watching this to go to Climate Central. I think you would probably Google search a Climate Central simulation. They've spent a lot of their resources creating this simulation. I haven't gone into this simulation for probably 2 years, a year or two. It's really informative, though. It's really cool. You can actually enter your home address, and you can see how much your address or your house or where you're located or any specific address, probably around the world, is going to be impacted by rising ocean sea levels. So you can play with those variables on that platform. So again, that's Climate Central. They have the platform set up to where it shows how much the ocean level is going to rise, whether it's 1 year, 10 years. You could just select or enter a wide range of parameters to understand that. And I do want to thank Philip for mentioning the concern for the developing countries. That is a concern, and that bothers me when it comes to, you know, where our money is, where the money is. The major metropolitan areas, the high populous areas, usually get a lot of the funding, the attention, the help, the resources, the mitigation, everything. So we do have to be concerned for the developing countries that are just as susceptible, if not more susceptible, towards, you know, regarding the rise in ocean sea level, and continue to protect them. So Florida is, you can watch videos if you want, you know, Google search Florida, Miami, rise in ocean sea level, and it is happening. And I think Paris was affected. Was it Paris that was affected by the rising ocean sea level and high tides? And we're just going to continue to see that around the world. So there's also a lot of misinformation about Antarctica. There's these videos online saying, "Oh well, Antarctica's growing, and you know the glaciers are not melting." So if you think of maybe the surface area around Antarctica is actually growing, so from satellite imagery, it looks like it's growing, but that's no comparison to the you know, the 80 meters or 100 meters, 200 meters of the height of the ice that's on the continent of Antarctica. That it's just anyways, it's just spread of misinformation. So as I think about man's impact on the earth and how we can see so many man-made structures from space. At one point, it was the Great Wall of China, and we can see cities, and we can see all this from these satellite images. I just want us to think outside of the box. Maybe Paul wants to respond. So we've changed Earth's biosphere. We've, you know, from a geological perspective, we've, you know, torn down mountains. We don't necessarily have the capability, or we're probably not going to relocate cities. It's just going to be really difficult because, I mean, we see all these oil refineries and all these jack pumps. We haven't even taken those out when we're not using them. So I do see a lot of problems with us just abandoning all of these coastal regions and all of these cities and just letting them get taken over by the ocean. And that in itself is going to cause a positive feedback loop when it comes to pollution entering the ocean. And I've seen that, you know, from my experience covering hurricanes around the world. There's this one time when I covered a hurricane. It was in the New York area, New Jersey, and I saw all of this debris along the coast. And then I was like, why is all this debris right here when there's like a higher concentration of debris? So I got on Google Maps and I looked, and there was maybe 20, 50 homes right there that were no longer there, just piles of debris. So we're going to continue to see more areas just washed away from the ocean in association with this. So thinking outside of the box. Now, I don't want to embarrass myself. This could be completely unrealistic, but we have now changed Earth so much, as I was just mentioning, from the satellite imagery from around the world and what we've been able to accomplish. We also have, you know, the XL pipeline, Keystone. We're shipping oil through these major pipes around the world. And since we've have all this human resources, power, money, I just think it's so difficult to get to the root of the problem of climate change and slowing, you know, the increase in atmospheric temperatures and increase in ocean temperatures, because the damage has already been done. We're now mitigating the damage around the world. So I don't know if it's completely far-fetched, but we have been able to accomplish a lot. I just wonder what we can do as far as pumping water into some of the huge valleys around the world that might slow the ocean level rise. And maybe if the whole world directed their attention towards this, it might make a difference, because if not, the consequences are really severe. Now, we wouldn't use fossil fuel created energy to pump all of that, so we probably wouldn't be able to do that. It's probably not realistic unless the Hadron Collider, if I said that correctly, became functioning, or the fusion technology to have that volume of energy to move that volume of water. And I don't know if that's completely unrealistic. And I'm not saying we could do that now, but maybe in 10 years, 20 years, we'll have those capabilities, because if not, the consequences are very serious, extreme, and detrimental.
Ms. Prati. Thank you, Alex. Mr. Prati.
Yeah, so as Rob mentioned, a lot of things are happening. There's a progress in science, so it makes us feel happy and hopeful. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are still in a state of denial. They know the facts, they are also experiencing the effects, but they are not accepting the facts. So we have to make a shift, because of their livelihood is getting affected or the economical benefits. But our job is to convince them to at least accept and do something about it. Yeah, and in rural areas and underdeveloped countries, developing nations, we still have a great opportunity to, in rural areas, to change the meaning of development, where the development is still going to take place, to integrate it with nature and make it sustainable. And the last thing, as Paul mentioned, we saw the catastrophe 2 days back, because of a portion of Nanda Devi Glacier got melted, and it affected a entire region of Chamoli in Uttarakhand. So global warming has already knocked our doors, but our job is to let's not let's not make global warming destroy our homes.
Thank you.
That's
thank
it.
you.
And thank you for having
thank you.
me.
Thank you, Mr. Philip.
Thank you again, Alex, for the invitation, and Sharif and everyone for including me and listening. Paul had just talked about the complexity of our lives and situations, and the more technologically dependent we are, in a sense, the more at risk we are. And this I agree with completely. And I see that I'm what we call a localist. We work with very extremely local strategies and in the local community to deal on a small scale what's happening and create a model or a sample of what people can do elsewhere. And for instance, we put in groins. We built stone groins just by hand, transporting large rocks by ship, and actually have caused sand to build up again on our beach, and to protect our beach with these groins, as well as with mangrove planting. And I just want to encourage everyone who's listening to not give up hope, because Alex and I came in contact some years ago, both because I think we're doing hurricane disaster relief, but as an example of how much just a few people can do, Alex and I teamed up, and with just a matter of some connections to some nurses and other people, we were able to get $30,000 worth of medical supplies donated and delivered on the ground in Puerto Rico, in Haiti, in Florida, in Fiji, whereas just me on one end collecting materials and all, and Alex literally in the midst of the hurricane, going to the hurricanes and getting help directly to people. It's really just a couple of us who teamed up to make a huge difference in the lives of people by getting medical supplies. Alex actually set up a Wi-Fi hotspot so people could contact their relatives and let them know they were safe. We do not have fear to be in the midst of this situation, but we have to remind people that your ability to survive and flourish in the midst of global warming depends on your personal efforts with your own community. So I want to encourage people, wherever they are, to reach out to others in their community, establish stronger community ties. So when these inevitable tsunamis and hurricanes come, that we have each other to rely upon, so there isn't so much needless death. And also, by living a simpler life and simpler housing, a simpler, less technologically dependent life or complicated life, we actually can live a better life. And by combining efforts like in a barn raising, we can, and we do, we already have done this, bring communities together to create housing and hurricane relief structures, to create groins and mitigation strategies to keep the damage from being so severe to buy us time. People have to know that there are, even if their heads are in the sand about the fact that global warming is happening, we have to remind people that they actually can make a difference. They can do something about it. And that is by creating community directly where you are and working together to say, okay, here's 5 people who are truly at risk. They're elderly, they're poor, they're still fishing on the beach. They're going to be washed away in the next hurricane. We have been working together to create that, and then it models a system where other people realize, you know, that's a simple answer to people's lives and livelihoods on the front lines. If we work together, we can create these alternatives. So I want to encourage people to be less materialistic, less dependent on national governments and international governments, and create communities that are resilient and regenerative by using simple permaculture and other techniques in which we can reduce our carbon footprint and our danger by feeling we are alone and not working together as communities in a local sense. We have done these things already. We've shown it can happen. And I'm glad to work with any of you who want to assist that in your own countries. I mean, everywhere there are rural and poor people who are on the front lines of climate change. And with just education and some community development, we can help the people most at risk. I've assisted already in 10 hurricanes. Fiji was just hit by 2 hurricanes in a month. And I am more than impressed. I am honored to work with the Fiji government and their disaster management relief agencies, because they actually set up over 1,000 evacuation centers were set up overnight by working with local churches and community centers and health clinics to get people, to give them a chance to not drown, as most people, a lot of people in Fiji don't swim, and get them somewhere safe. Fiji is a tiny country without a lot of money. It's gone a lot poorer because of the loss of international tourism and the economies, the crash of sugar prices. But we are creating a new economy that's based on creating low-cost natural shelters that people can directly make a more sustainable economy in the construction way. I also want to mention what Paul talked about, storing energy by pumping it up. Microhydro systems are a way to create local energy by using a solar energy to pump water up higher and then releasing it at night to create electricity through a small generator. These systems really work, and small scale really does work. So by in enhancing community development locally and using simple permaculture style technologies, we can work together to make a safer, more just situation, especially for those who are subsistence people on the front lines living at the ocean where their food sources are. So I want to thank you all for including me and for listening. And if anyone would like to get in touch with me, I'm Philip Merkin on Hotmail, at hotmail.com, as well as on Facebook. And our website is easyadobe.org. But we are the Fiji Institute of Sustainable Habitats, and we are continuing to educate people with governments, but especially in local areas. So thank you all for all of your efforts and for all the education you're providing. God bless us all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is really, really important for the developing nations. And I believe that our audience especially get a lot of guideline that how they have to create at least some sort of awareness, and which is really important. And beside that, I just want to add that World Talent Economy Forums, we already collaborating with different university, school, college, think tanks, government and corporations in specifically in Asia Pacific, in USA and Europe. So we want more collaborations or any of the organization, those who want to collaborate with us as well as distribute our content for the education and research purpose. We are very much open for them. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. See you tomorrow. It's really, really great session for our youth community. Thank you. Thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Take care.
Good luck, everyone.
Bye.